Sarah Martinez was grading papers when her phone rang. It was a Thursday evening in March, and rain was hitting her small apartment windows. She lived alone in a tiny place above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread always made her feel better. After long days at work, she taught music at Lincoln Elementary School. The school was old and needed many repairs. The music room had only 12 working keyboards and one old piano that was missing some keys. Sarah had been there for 8 years. She loved her students, but the job was hard. There was never enough money for new instruments or music books. Sarah looked at the phone. She did not know the number. Most nights she let unknown calls go to voicemail. But something made her pick up this time. "Hello, is this Sarah Martinez?" asked a woman's voice. The woman sounded worried and rushed. Double quotes. "Yes, this is Sarah," she answered. She put down her red pen and pushed the student papers to one side of her kitchen table. "Oh, thank goodness. My name is Linda Chun. I work at the Riverside Community Center. I got your number from Mrs. Garcia at your school. She said you play piano very well." Sarah felt confused. Mrs. Garcia was the principal at Lincoln Elementary. Why would she give out Sarah's phone number? "I'm sorry, but what is this about?" Sarah asked. Linda took a deep breath. "We have a big problem. Tomorrow night is our annual charity gala. It's a very important event for us. We raise money for music programs in schools like yours. Our piano player just called in sick. She has the flu and can't perform. The event is in less than 24 hours. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had not performed in front of people for more than 10 years. The last time was at her college graduation recital. After that, life got in the way. Her father got sick and needed care. Money was tight. She had to get a job right away instead of trying to become a professional musician. "Mrs. Chun, I think." "There's been a mistake. I'm just a school teacher." "I don't perform anymore," Sarah said. "Please just hear me out," Linda said quickly. "Mrs. Garcia told me you studied music in college. She said you're very talented. We really need someone tomorrow night. The whole event depends on having music. If we cancel, we lose all the money we plan to raise for kids' music programs." Sarah walked to her living room window. She could see people hurrying down the street with umbrellas. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Sarah often felt lost these days. Teaching was good work, but she sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had tried to make music her career. "What kind of music would I need to play?" she asked. She was not sure why she asked. Part of her was curious, even though she felt scared. "Nothing too hard," Linda said. "Just some background music during dinner. Maybe a few classical pieces that people know. Something nice but not too fancy. The crowd is mostly older people who donate money to charity. They like familiar music." Sarah thought about her students. Many of them came from families who could not afford music lessons. At school, music class was the only chance these kids had to learn about piano, guitar, or singing. If the charity gala raised money for programs like hers, maybe it was worth considering. "How long would I need to play?" Sarah asked. "About an hour total. Maybe 4 or 5 songs spread out through the evening. There would be breaks between each piece for speeches and dinner." "It's really not that much." Sarah sat down on her old couch. It was the same couch she had bought when she first got the teaching job. Everything in her life seemed old and stuck in the same place. Her days were the same every week. Monday through Friday at school, weekends alone grading papers or cleaning her apartment. "I don't have the right clothes for a fancy event," Sarah said. It was true, but it was also an excuse. She owned 2 dresses that were nice enough for parent conferences, but nothing fancy. "Don't worry about that," Linda said. "This is a community event, not a formal concert. Just wear something nice and dark. The important thing is the music." Sarah thought about her old piano at home. It was a small upright piano that her grandmother had given her. She still played it sometimes, but only when she felt sad or happy and needed to express her feelings. She never thought anyone would want to hear her play anymore. "Mrs. Chun, I really don't think I'm the right person for this. I get nervous in front of people. I haven't performed since college." "Sarah, can I tell you something?" Linda's voice became softer. I heard you play. Once. It was at the school winter concert last year. You played background music before the kids performed. I was there with my nephew. Your playing was beautiful. It made me feel peaceful and happy at the same time. Sarah remembered that concert. She had played a few simple songs on the old school piano while parents found their seats. She thought no one was really listening. The thing is, Linda continued, we've called everyone else we can think of. The high school music teacher is out of town. The church pianist is already booked for another event. You're our last hope. If you say no, we'll have to use recorded music, and it just won't be the same. Sarah looked at her music books on the shelf. They were dusty from not being used much. She had once dreamed of playing in beautiful concert halls. Now here was a chance to play for people again, even if it was just background music at a charity dinner. What time would I need to be there? She asked. The event starts at 7. Could you come at 6 for a quick sound check? The venue is the Grand Ballroom at the Riverside Hotel. Do you know where that is? Sarah knew the hotel. She had driven past it many times but never been inside. It was one of the fanciest places in town. I would need to see the music ahead of time, Sarah said. I can't just show up and play without practice. Of course. I can email you the sheet music tonight. It's all standard classical pieces. Nothing you haven't seen before, I'm sure. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. Part of her wanted to say no and go back to her safe, quiet life. But another part of her, a part she had not heard from in years, was excited about the possibility of making music for people again. If I say yes, this is just for tomorrow night, right? It's not a regular thing? Just tomorrow night, Linda promised. One evening and you'll be helping so many kids have access to music education. Sarah thought about her students. She thought about 8-year-old Marcus, who hummed songs all day but had never touched a piano. She thought about 10-year-old Emma, who asked every week when the school might get more instruments. Okay, Sarah said before she could change her mind. I'll do it, really? Oh, thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to us. After Sarah hung up the phone, she sat in her quiet apartment and wondered what she had just agreed to do. Sarah woke up Friday morning with butterflies in her stomach. She had barely slept. All night she kept thinking about the charity gala. What if she made mistakes? What if people did not like her playing? What if she forgot how to play in front of others? She got to school early and tried to focus on teaching her classes. But her mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. During lunch break, she went to the music room and practiced on the old school piano. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but slowly they remembered how to move across the keys. The sheet music that Linda had emailed was not too hard. There were 5 pieces, a Mozart sonata, a Chopin waltz, some Debussy, a Bach invention, and a piece by Beethoven. Sarah knew all of these songs from her college days, but knowing them and playing them well in front of people were too different. Things. After school ended, Sarah went home to get ready. She looked through her closet 3 times. Finally, she chose her black dress. It was simple but nice. She had worn it to her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. She put on her only pair of good shoes and some small earrings that had been her mother's. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a teacher going to a school meeting, not like someone who was about to perform at a fancy hotel. But there was no time to buy new clothes now. She drove to the Riverside Hotel at 5:30. The building was much bigger than it looked from the street. There were tall columns at the front and a doorman in a uniform. Sarah felt very small as she walked through the fancy lobby with marble floors and crystal lights hanging from the ceiling. "Excuse me," she said to a woman at the front desk. "I'm looking for Linda Chun. I'm the piano player for tonight's charity gala." The woman smiled. "Oh yes, Mrs. Chun is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 2nd floor. The Grand Ballroom is at the end of the hall." Sarah's hands were shaking a little as she pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened on the 2nd floor, she could hear people talking and moving chairs around. She followed the sounds to a large room with double doors. The ballroom was beautiful. There were round tables covered with white cloths and flowers. The ceiling was high with fancy decorations. At one end of the room was a small stage with a black grand piano. Sarah had never played on such a nice piano before. "Sarah!" "You came." Linda Chun hurried over to her. Linda was a small woman with short gray hair and a big smile. She wore a blue dress and looked much more put together than Sarah felt. "Thank you so much for doing this," Linda said. "Let me show you around and introduce you to some people." Sarah met the event photographer, the caterer, and several volunteers who were setting up decorations. Everyone seemed very busy and excited about the evening. Sarah felt like she was watching it all from outside, like she did not really belong there. "Now, let's check the piano," Linda said. They walked up to the stage together. The piano was gorgeous. It was much bigger than Sarah's piano at home. The keys were perfectly white and clean. When Sarah pressed one key, the sound was rich and clear. "This is a very nice piano," Sarah said. She was surprised by how good it sounded. "It should be," Linda laughed. "The hotel spent a lot of money on it. They host concerts here sometimes. You're going to sound wonderful on it." Sarah sat down at the piano bench and played a few scales. To warm up, even just the scales sounded better than anything she could play at home or at school. For a moment, she forgot to be nervous. She just enjoyed the feeling of her fingers on such responsive keys. "The sound system will pick up the piano automatically," Linda explained. "You don't need to worry about microphones or anything like that. Just play naturally." People started arriving at 6:30. Sarah watched from a corner of the room as men in suits and women in fancy dresses came in. They looked like they had money and education. Many of them seemed to know each other. Well, they talked and laughed while holding glasses of wine. Sarah felt more and more out of place. These people probably went to real concerts all the time. They probably knew the difference between good playing and bad playing. What if they could tell she was just a school teacher who had not performed in years? "Sarah, it's time for your first song," Linda said. "Just play for about 10 minutes while people finish arriving and get their drinks." Sarah walked to the piano with her sheet music. Her legs felt wobbly. She sat down and adjusted the bench height. The room was getting noisier as more people arrived. Most of them were not paying attention to the stage at all. She decided to start with the Mozart piece. It was the one she felt most comfortable with. Sarah placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. At first, her fingers felt stiff and nervous, but after a few measures, muscle memory took over. The Mozart flowed out of her hands almost by itself. The beautiful piano made every note sound clear and sweet. A few people near the stage turned to listen. Sarah tried not to look at them directly. She focused on the music and tried to remember why she loved playing piano in the first place. It was not about impressing people. It was about making something beautiful. When she finished the Mozart, a few people clapped politely. Most of the room was still talking and not really listening. Sarah felt a little disappointed, but she reminded herself that this was just background music. She was not supposed to be the main attraction. Linda came over during a break. "That was lovely," she said. "You have a very nice touch. The piano sounds great with your playing." "Thank you," Sarah said. "It's easier to play well on such a good instrument." "The dinner will start in about 20 minutes, Linda explained. "Then you'll play the Chopin waltz while people are eating their salad course. After that, there will be some speeches, and you'll play the Debussy during the main course. Does that sound okay?" Sarah nodded. She was starting to feel a little more comfortable. The first piece had gone well. Maybe she could get through the evening without embarrassing herself. During dinner, Sarah played the Chopin waltz. This was a piece she had always loved. It was gentle and flowing like water moving over rocks. As she played, she noticed that some people had stopped talking to listen. A woman at a nearby table was swaying slightly to the music. An older man was nodding his head in time with the rhythm. When the speeches began, Sarah took a break. She sat at a small table in the back of the room and ate the dinner that Linda had saved for her. The food was much fancier than anything she usually ate. There was salmon with some kind of sauce, vegetables she did not recognize, and a small cake for dessert. While she ate, Sarah listened to the speeches. The first speaker was a school principal from across town. He talked about how music programs help children learn better in all subjects. He said that kids who played instruments did better in math and reading too. The second speaker was a woman whose daughter had learned violin through a program, funded by last year's charity gala. The woman's voice shook as she described how music had given her shy daughter confidence and friends. Sarah felt proud to be part of an event that helped kids like her students. Even if she was just providing background music, she was contributing to something important. Time for the Debussy. Linda whispered to her as the main course was being served. Sarah returned to the piano. The Debussy piece was called Clair de Lune, which meant moonlight in French. It was soft and dreamy, perfect for dinner music. As Sarah played, she noticed that the room had gotten quieter. More people seemed to be listening this time. The melody was beautiful and sad at the same time. It reminded Sarah of looking at the moon through her bedroom window when she was a child. Her grandmother used to play this same piece on the old upright piano that Sarah now had in her apartment. As she played, Sarah began to feel something she had almost forgotten. It was the joy of sharing music with other people. Even if they were just eating dinner and talking quietly, they were hearing the music she was making. She was adding beauty to their evening. When she finished Clair de Lune, there was a moment of quiet before the talking resumed. Sarah saw several people looking at her with appreciation. A man near the front gave her a small nod and a smile. Sarah realized that she was not just surviving the evening. She was actually enjoying it. The piano was wonderful to play, the music was beautiful, and the audience seemed to appreciate what she was doing. Maybe she had been hiding her talent for too long, but she still had 2 more pieces to play, including the final song that would end the evening. Sarah hoped she could keep her confidence up for the rest of the night. During the break between dinner and dessert, Sarah sat at the piano bench and let her fingers wander across the keys without making any sound. She was just feeling the smooth surface and remembering all the hours she had spent practicing when she was younger. The grand ballroom was buzzing with conversation. People were getting up from their tables to talk with friends at other tables. Some were looking at a silent auction display that raised more money for the music programs. Sarah watched them and thought about how different their lives probably were from hers, but as her fingers moved silently on the piano keys, memories started coming back to her. She remembered being 7 years old and begging her parents for piano lessons. She remembered her first recital when she was 9, wearing a white dress with pink flowers. She had been so nervous that her hands shook, but when she started playing, everything felt right. Sarah thought about her college professor, Dr. Williams. He had been a tall man with kind eyes who always believed in her talent. "Sarah," he used to say, "you don't just play the notes. You make the music come alive. That's a special gift." After college, Sarah had planned to audition for music schools and try to become a professional pianist. She had sent applications to several places and even scheduled some auditions. But then her father had a heart attack and everything changed. Her parents needed help paying medical bills. Her father could not work for months while he recovered. Sarah's younger brother was still in high school and could not help much. So Sarah took the first steady job she could find, which was teaching at Lincoln Elementary School. At first, she thought it would just be temporary. She told herself she would save money and try to pursue music later. But later never came. The bills kept coming, her father's health got worse, and teaching became her life. Sarah loved her students, but she sometimes felt like she had given up on her dreams. She wondered what would have happened if she had been braver and tried to make music her career anyway. Now, sitting at this beautiful piano in this elegant room, those old dreams felt closer than they had in years. The piano responded to her, touch in a way that her old upright piano at home never could. Every note sounded exactly the way she wanted it to sound. "You look like you're thinking about something important," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned around and saw an elderly man in a gray suit. He had white hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Oh, I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I was just remembering some things. Don't apologize, the man said with a smile. I'm Harold Peterson. I've been listening to your playing tonight. It's quite beautiful. Thank you, Sarah said. I'm Sarah Martinez. I teach music at Lincoln Elementary. A teacher, Harold said, nodding. That's wonderful. My late wife was a teacher too. She always said teaching was the most important job in the world. Harold sat down in a chair near the piano. You know, I've been coming to these charity galas for 15 years. We usually have very good musicians, but there's something special about your playing. It has real feeling in it. Sarah felt her cheeks get warm. I'm just playing background music, nothing fancy. Sometimes the simplest music is the most powerful, Harold said. My wife used to play piano, not professionally, just for our family. Some of my happiest memories are of her playing after dinner while I did the dishes. Music doesn't have to be performed in a concert hall to be meaningful. Sarah thought about this. She had always believed that if she was not performing in big venues for hundreds of people, her music did not really matter, but maybe that was not true. What kind of music did your wife like to play? Sarah asked. Oh, all kinds, Harold said. Classical pieces like you're playing tonight, but also popular songs from when we were young. She had a way of making every song sound like it was meant just for whoever was listening. Sarah smiled. That sounds wonderful. It was, Harold said. She passed away 3 years ago. I miss her music almost as much as I miss her voice. He was quiet for a moment. That's why I appreciate what you're doing tonight. You're giving people the gift of beautiful music. That matters more than you might think. Linda Shun appeared next to them. Sarah, we're ready for the batch piece now. This will be during dessert service. Harold stood up. It was lovely talking with you, Sarah. I'll be listening. Sarah felt warmer and more confident as she prepared to play the batch invention. Harold's words had reminded her that music was not just about showing off or impressing people. It was about sharing something beautiful with others. The batch piece was more complex than the others she had played so far. It had 2 melodies that weaved together like a conversation between old friends. As Sarah played, she thought about all the conversations she had with her students about music. She thought about the joy on their faces when they finally learned. A new song during the batch piece, Sarah noticed that more people were paying attention. The conversations had gotten quieter, and several people had turned their chairs to face the piano. She could see Harold at his table, listening with his eyes closed and a small smile on his face. When she finished the batch, there was more applause than before. Some people even stopped their conversations to clap. Sarah felt a little thrill of excitement. It had been so long since she had felt appreciated as a musician rather than just as a teacher, but the biggest test was still ahead. The final piece of the evening was the Beethoven. It was more dramatic and powerful than the other songs. Sarah had chosen one of his easier sonatas, but it still had sections that required technical skill and emotional expression. As dessert was being served, Sarah took a few minutes to mentally prepare for the Beethoven. She thought about her college days when she used to practice this piece for hours. Dr. Williams had taught her that Beethoven's music was like a story. It had quiet moments and loud moments, sadness and joy, struggle and triumph. Beethoven was not afraid to show his emotions, Dr. Williams used to say. His music is honest about the difficulties of life, but it's also full of hope. When you play Beethoven, you have to be brave enough to feel those emotions too. Sarah had always connected with Beethoven's music because it reminded her of her own life. There had been struggles and disappointments, but there had also been moments of real joy and beauty. Teaching her students, watching them discover music for the first time, seeing their faces light up when they played their first song, those were moments worth celebrating. As she sat at the piano, Sarah realized that she did not want to just get through the Beethoven piece safely. She wanted to really play it the way she used to in college. She wanted to take some risks and let the music be as powerful as it was meant to be, but she also felt scared. The other pieces had been gentle and safe. Beethoven was different. It demanded more from the player and from the audience. What if people did not like it? What if she made mistakes? What if she was not good enough anymore? Sarah looked out at the audience. Most of them were eating dessert and talking softly. They probably expected another quiet, pretty piece like the ones she had played before. They were not expecting her to suddenly play with real passion and intensity, but then she saw Harold looking at her with encouragement in his eyes. She thought about his wife playing piano for their family, making every song meaningful. She thought about her students who trusted her to teach them about music. She thought about all the years she had been playing it safe, never taking chances, never really showing what she could do. Sarah put her hands on the piano keys and made a decision. She was going to play the Beethoven the way it was meant to be played. She was going to stop hiding her talent and start sharing it. She was going to be brave, just like Dr. Williams had taught her to be. The room was still buzzing with conversation as Sarah began the opening notes of the Beethoven Sonata. But something was different this time. Her touch was stronger, more confident. The music that came from the piano was not just background anymore. It was music that demanded to be heard. And slowly, people began to notice that something special was happening on the stage. Sarah's heart was beating fast as she started the Beethoven Sonata. The opening notes were soft and questioning, like someone asking a difficult question. Her fingers moved carefully across the keys, but she could feel something building inside. At first, she played the piece exactly as it was written on the sheet music. The melody was beautiful but safe. People in the audience were still talking and eating their dessert. A few looked up when she started playing, but most continued their conversations. Sarah had always been the kind of person who followed rules. In school, she turned in every assignment on time. As a teacher, she followed the lesson plans exactly. Even in her personal life, she was careful and predictable. She paid her bills early, went to bed at the same time every night, and never took big risks. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the beautiful piano that responded to her every touch. Maybe it was the elegant ballroom that made her feel like she was in a different world. Maybe it was Harold's kind words about music, being a gift to share with others, or maybe it was just that she was tired of being invisible. For 8 years at Lincoln Elementary, Sarah had watched other teachers get recognition and promotions. She had seen her music program lose funding while sports teams got new equipment. She had listened to parents talk about their children's real subjects like math and reading, as if music was just a fun activity that did not really matter, even. Tonight, Linda had introduced her as a local teacher who graciously stepped in, not as a musician, not as someone with talent and training, just as a helpful person filling a gap. As Sarah continued playing the Beethoven, she thought about all the times she had made herself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. In college, she had been one of the most talented students. In her program, Dr. Williams had often chosen her to perform at student concerts. Other students came to her for help with difficult pieces, but somewhere along the way, Sarah had started believing that her music was not important enough to share. She had convinced herself that she was just a school teacher who happened to play piano, not a real musician. The Beethoven piece was reaching a more complex section now. The melody became more challenging, with faster runs and bigger jumps between notes. Sarah could play it safely and correctly, the way she had planned. Or she could play it the way she felt it, the way Dr. Williams had taught her. Sarah glanced up at the audience. Most people were still not really listening. They were focused on their dessert and their conversations about charity work and community events. To them, she was just background music, no more important than the flowers on their tables. But then she saw Harold again. He was not eating dessert. He was not talking to anyone. He was watching her with complete attention, waiting to see what she would do next. His expression reminded her of her students when they were about to learn something new and exciting. At that moment, Sarah realized something important. She had been playing it safe her whole life, and where had it gotten her? She was 32 years old, living alone in a small apartment, teaching at a school that did not value her program. She had given up her dreams to be responsible and practical, but she was not really happy. What if tonight was her chance to stop hiding? What if This elegant ballroom and beautiful piano were offering her a moment to remember who she used to be before life made her small and careful. Sarah looked down at her hands on the piano keys. They were the same hands that had once played with confidence and joy. They were the same hands that had dreamed of performing on stages around the world. Those dreams were still inside her somewhere, waiting for her to be brave enough to let them out. The Beethoven Sonata was approaching its most dramatic section. This was where the music became powerful and emotional, where a pianist could really show what they were capable of. Sarah had two choices. She could continue playing it safely and quietly, keeping it in the background where no one would really notice. Or she could play it the way Beethoven had written it, with all the passion and intensity it deserved. For a moment, Sarah felt frozen between these two choices. Playing safely was what she had always done. It was comfortable and predictable. No one would criticize her if she just finished the piece quietly and went home to her small apartment, but playing with real passion was risky. People might notice. They might judge her. They might think she was showing off or trying to be something she was not. What if she made mistakes? What if she was not as good as she remembered? What if people laughed at her for thinking she was a real musician? Sarah thought about her students again. She was always telling them to be brave with their music, to not be afraid of making mistakes, to play with feeling instead of just hitting the right notes. How could she ask them to be brave if she was not willing to be brave herself? She thought about Harold's wife, who had played piano for her family with love and joy. Music did not have to be perfect to be meaningful. It just had to be honest. Sarah thought about Dr. Williams and all the lessons he had taught her about music being a language for expressing emotions that words could not capture. Sarah, he used to say, when you play with real feeling, you give people permission to feel their own emotions too. That's a powerful gift. The moment of decision had arrived. The music was building toward its climax, and Sarah had to choose who she wanted to be. The safe, invisible schoolteacher who followed the rules and never took risks? Or the musician she had once dreamed of becoming, the one who was not afraid to share her true talent with the world? Sarah took a deep breath and made her choice. She began to play the Beethoven Sonata the way it was meant to be played. Her fingers moved with new confidence and strength. The melody became richer and more expressive. Instead of staying quietly in the background, the music began to fill the entire ballroom. The notes that came from the piano were no longer just pleasant background sounds. They were music that demanded attention, music that told a story, music that came from deep inside Sarah's heart and soul. As the sound grew stronger and more beautiful, something magical began to happen in the ballroom. One by one, people stopped talking, forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died away as people turned to see where this incredible music was coming from. Sarah did not notice the changing audience at first. She was too focused on the music, too lost in the joy of finally playing with her whole heart. But as she continued, she began to sense that something had shifted in the room. The Beethoven was becoming more than just a piano piece. It was becoming a moment of transformation, both for Sarah and for everyone listening. For the first time in years, Sarah was not hiding her talent. She was sharing it fully and honestly with the world, and the world was starting to pay attention. Sarah's fingers moved across the piano keys like they had been waiting years for this moment. The Beethoven Sonata flowed from her hands with a power and beauty that surprised even her. She was no longer thinking about the sheet music or trying to remember the right notes. The music was coming from somewhere deeper than memory. As she played, Sarah began to add her own touches to the piece. These were not mistakes or accidents. They were musical choices that felt right in the moment. She held some notes longer than written, letting their beauty ring through the ballroom. She made some passages softer and others stronger, following the emotions that the music brought up in her heart. This was something Sarah had learned in college but had forgotten during her years of careful, safe living. Great musicians did not just play the notes exactly as written. They brought their own interpretation and feeling to the music. They made it personal and alive. The audience was changing too. What had started as polite background listening was becoming something much more intense. The conversations had stopped completely now. People were turning in their chairs to face the piano. Some were leaning forward, drawn in by the power of the music. Sarah could feel their attention, but instead of making her nervous, it gave her energy. She realized that she had been starving for this connection with an audience. Teaching children was wonderful, but playing for adults who could fully appreciate the complexity and emotion of the music was something she had missed terribly. The Beethoven piece was reaching its most challenging section. This was where many amateur pianists would slow down and play carefully to avoid mistakes. But Sarah did not slow down. Instead, she leaned into the difficulty, letting her fingers dance across the keys with speed and precision that she had not used in years. Her left hand played a complex bass line that sounded like thunder rumbling in the distance. Her right hand wove a melody above it that soared and dipped like a bird in flight. The two hands worked together to create music that was both powerful and delicate, strong and beautiful. As Sarah played, memories of her college performances came flooding back. She remembered the feeling of being completely absorbed in the music, a feeling like she and the piano were one instrument. She remembered the thrill of taking musical risks and having them pay off. She remembered what it felt like to be truly confident in her abilities, but this performance was different from her college days in an important way. Back then, Sarah had been trying to prove that she was good enough, trying to impress her teachers and compete with other students. Tonight, she was not trying to prove anything to anyone. She was simply sharing music that she loved with people who were willing to listen. The freedom of this realization made her playing even more expressive. She began to stretch the boundaries of the written music even further. Where Beethoven had written a simple melody, Sarah added decorative notes that made it more interesting. Where the music called for a pause, she extended it just long enough to build anticipation. These were not random changes. They came from Sarah's deep understanding of how music works and how to make it more emotionally powerful. She was using skills that she had developed in college but had been too afraid to use in her everyday life. Harold was watching from his table with tears in his eyes. This was the kind of music his wife would have loved, music that spoke directly to the heart, without needing words. He could see that Sarah was not just playing notes anymore. She was telling a story through the piano. Other people in the audience were having their own reactions. Linda Chun, who had been worried all week about finding a replacement pianist, was amazed at what she was hearing. This was not the simple background music she had asked for. This was a real performance by a truly gifted musician. A woman at table 6 had stopped eating her chocolate cake and was staring at the piano with her mouth slightly open. She had been to many concerts at the City Symphony Hall, but she had never heard playing this intimate and powerful. The music was making her think about her own dreams that she had given up years ago. A young man who worked for one of the sponsoring businesses was secretly recording the performance on his phone. He could tell that something special was happening, something that his friends would not believe unless they heard it for themselves. Sarah was now completely lost in the music. The ballroom, the audience, even her own nervousness had disappeared. There was only the piano and the music flowing through her fingers. She was playing passages that were not in the sheet music at all, improvising variations on Beethoven's themes that came from her own musical imagination. This kind of improvisation was something Sarah had been naturally good at in college, but she had not done it in years. Tonight, with this beautiful piano and receptive audience, those skills were coming back to her like old friends returning home. The music built to a climax that was much more dramatic than anything written in the original score. Sarah's hands moved with incredible speed and accuracy, creating cascades of notes that seemed to fill every corner of the grand ballroom. The sound was so rich and full that it seemed impossible that it was coming from just one person at one piano. But then, just as suddenly as it had built up, the music became soft and gentle again. Sarah played a quiet section that was like a whisper after a shout, delicate and intimate. This contrast made the quiet moments even more beautiful and the earlier dramatic sections even more powerful by comparison. The audience was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving around the room. Everyone was focused on the small figure at the piano who was creating this incredible music. Sarah could sense their attention, and it filled her with a joy she had almost forgotten existed. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the technique or the knowledge, but for this magical connection between performer and audience, this sharing of beauty and emotion that could happen when music was played. With complete honesty and skill. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Sarah knew that something important was changing in her life. She was not just playing piano anymore. She was remembering who she really was underneath. All the years of playing it safe and making herself small, the final section of the Beethoven was approaching, and Sarah was ready to give it everything she had. She was no longer the nervous school teacher who had walked into the ballroom a few hours ago. She was a musician, a real musician, and she was about to show everyone in the room exactly what that meant. Sarah's transformation was complete. The careful, quiet school teacher had disappeared, replaced by someone who played with the confidence and skill of a professional musician. Her hands moved across the keys like they were dancing, creating music that seemed to have its own life and energy. The Beethoven Sonata was no longer recognizable as the simple piece from her sheet music. Sarah had turned it into something entirely new while still honoring the original composer's intentions. She was having a musical conversation with Beethoven himself, adding her own voice to his timeless melodies. The audience was mesmerized. People who had come to the charity gala expecting a pleasant evening of dinner and polite conversation were witnessing something extraordinary. Many of them had never heard piano playing this powerful and emotional in person before. At table 3, an elderly woman named Margaret was thinking about her late husband. He had been a jazz musician who always told her that the best performances happened when musicians stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be honest. Watching Sarah play, Margaret could see exactly what her husband had meant. A teenage girl who was there with her grandparents had been bored all evening. She spent most of her time texting friends and wishing she could leave. But now she was completely focused on the music, realizing for the first time that classical piano could be just as exciting as the pop music she usually listened to. Even the hotel staff had stopped working to listen. The waiters stood still with their serving trays, and the bartender came out from behind his station to get a better view of the piano. They had served at hundreds of events in this ballroom, but they had never heard anything like this. Sarah was now playing music that existed nowhere except in this moment. She was improvising freely, using Beethoven's themes as a starting point for her own musical ideas. Her years of study and practice were all coming together in a spontaneous creation that was uniquely hers. The music told stories without words. There were passages that sounded like joy dancing in sunlight, others that felt like sadness walking alone in rain. Sarah played sections that were as gentle as a mother's lullaby, and others that were as powerful as a thunderstorm over the ocean. Her left hand created rhythms that seemed to make the whole room pulse with energy. Her right hand sang melodies that were so beautiful they made people hold their breath. Together, her hands were having a conversation that everyone in the room could understand, even if they could not speak the language of music. Harold was crying openly now, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what he was hearing. It reminded him of every wonderful moment he had shared with his wife, every sunset they had watched together, every quiet evening when she had played piano, while he read his book nearby. Linda Shun was in shock. She had called Sarah just 24 hours ago asking for simple background music. Instead, she was getting a performance that would be talked about for years. She knew that everyone in this room would remember this evening for the rest of their lives. Sarah herself was experiencing something she had never felt before, not even in her best college performances. She was completely free from fear, from self-doubt, from the need to please anyone else. She was simply making music for the pure joy of it, and that joy was flowing out through her fingers and filling the entire ballroom. The improvisation reached heights that surprised even Sarah. Her hands were moving faster than her conscious mind could follow, but every note was exactly right. It was as if the music was playing itself through her, as if she had become a channel for something larger than herself. She played a passage that started soft and mysterious, like footsteps in an empty cathedral. Gradually it built in volume and intensity, becoming more urgent and passionate. The melody climbed higher and higher, reaching notes that rang out like church bells celebrating a joyous occasion. Then, without warning, the music became playful and light. Sarah's fingers danced across the keys in patterns that sparkled like light on water. The rhythm became bouncy and cheerful, making several people in the audience smile without realizing why. But Sarah was not finished yet. She brought the music back to Beethoven's original themes, but now they sounded completely transformed by everything that had come before. The familiar melodies had new meaning, new depth, new emotional power. The young man who had been recording on his phone realized that his battery was dying. He quickly switched to another device, desperate not to miss any of this incredible performance. He knew that what he was witnessing was the kind of moment that would go viral on social media, the kind of performance that could change someone's life overnight. A music critic who happened to be at the gala as someone's guest was frantically taking notes on his napkin. He had reviewed concerts by world-famous pianists, but he had rarely heard playing with this much genuine emotion and technical brilliance combined. He was already planning the article he would write about this unknown teacher, who had just announced herself as a major talent. Sarah was building toward what she sensed would be the final climax of her improvisation. Everything she had played so far had been leading to this moment. She gathered all the musical themes she had introduced and began weaving them together in a complex tapestry of sound. Her left hand played a deep, resonant bass line that seemed to come from the earth itself. Her right hand soared above it with a melody that reached toward the sky. The two parts moved together and apart, creating harmonies that were sometimes peaceful and sometimes full of exciting tension. The volume grew until the music filled every inch of the grand ballroom. But it was not harsh or overwhelming. Instead, it was like being surrounded by beauty, like standing inside a waterfall of pure sound that washed away everything except the joy of being alive. And able to hear such incredible music, people in the audience were leaning forward in their chairs, afraid to miss even a single note. Some were holding hands with their companions, sharing this extraordinary moment together. Others sat alone but felt connected to everyone else in the room through the universal language of music. Sarah could feel that she was reaching the peak of what was possible in this moment. Her technique, her emotion, her musical imagination, and the response of the audience had all come together in perfect harmony. She was about to bring this magical improvisation to its conclusion, and she wanted to make sure it was as beautiful and powerful as everything that had come before. The final phrases were approaching, and Sarah knew that when they ended, her life would never be the same again. Sarah brought the incredible musical journey to its conclusion with a final passage that seemed to gather up every beautiful moment from the entire performance. Her hands moved with perfect grace across the keys, creating notes that hung in the air like stars in a clear night sky. The last chord was rich and full, using both hands to create a sound that filled the grand ballroom from floor to ceiling. Sarah held the notes for a long moment, letting them ring out until they faded naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the piano and placed them gently in her lap. The ballroom was completely quiet. For what felt like forever, nobody moved. The silence was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She looked down at her hands, hardly believing what had just happened. Had she really played all of that music? Had it really come from her? In the audience, people were processing what they had just experienced. Many of them were still in shock. They had come to a charity dinner expecting pleasant background music, and instead they had witnessed something that felt like a miracle. Harold was the first to move. Slowly, with tears still on his cheeks, he stood up from his table. His hands came together in applause that seemed to echo through the silent room. The sound broke the spell that had held everyone frozen. One by one, people began to stand. The woman at table 6 who had stopped eating her cake rose to her feet, clapping with enthusiasm. The teenage girl jumped up so quickly she almost knocked over her chair. Applauding with the excitement of someone who had just discovered something wonderful, Linda Chun stood up at the back of the room, her face showing amazement and pride. She had known Sarah was talented, but this performance had exceeded her wildest hopes. The music critic was on his feet, clapping and shaking his head in disbelief at what he had just heard. Within moments, the entire ballroom was standing. Every single person was applauding with genuine enthusiasm and appreciation. But this was not the polite, brief clapping that usually followed dinner music. This was the kind of ovation reserved for truly exceptional performances. The applause grew louder and more intense. People were not just clapping their hands. They were cheering and calling out words of appreciation. "Bravo!" shouted someone from the back. "Incredible!" called out another voice. "Amazing!" yelled the teenager who was clapping so hard her hands were starting to hurt. Sarah sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had never received a standing ovation before, not even in college. She had certainly never expected anything like this when she agreed to play background music at a charity dinner. She looked out at all the faces turned toward her, all the people standing and applauding just for her. These were not people who knew her or felt obligated to be polite. They were strangers who had been genuinely moved by her music, and they wanted her to know it. The young man who had been recording the performance was still holding up his phone, capturing not just the music but this incredible audience reaction. He knew that when he posted this video, people would not believe it was real. An unknown schoolteacher receiving a standing ovation like she was a world-famous concert pianist. It seemed impossible, but here it was happening. Harold was clapping with particular enthusiasm. He kept thinking about his wife and how much she would have loved this performance. He felt like Sarah had given him a gift by playing with such honesty and beauty. The music had reminded him of all the joy that was still possible in the world. Even after loss and sadness, the applause continued for what felt like several minutes. People did not want it to end because they did not want this magical evening to be over. Some were wiping away tears while they clapped. Others were smiling so widely their faces hurt. A few were already talking to their companions about how they would never forget this night. Sarah finally stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the audience properly. She was still in shock, but she managed a small bow to acknowledge their appreciation. This gesture made the applause even louder and more enthusiastic. "Speech! Speech!" called out someone from the middle of the room. Others picked up the call, until a chorus of voices was asking Sarah to say something. Sarah had never given a speech after a performance before. She was not sure what to say to express how she was feeling. But she walked to the front of the stage and held up her hand to quiet the applause. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. I don't really know what to say. I just want you to know that playing for you tonight has been one of the most wonderful experiences of my life." The audience erupted in another round of applause at these simple words. "I teach music to children," Sarah continued when the clapping died down, "and I always tell them that music is meant to be shared. Tonight you reminded me of that truth. Thank you for listening, really listening, to what I was trying to say through the music." The applause started again, even louder than before. People were not just appreciating the performance now. They were responding to Sarah's genuine gratitude and humility. Margaret, the elderly woman who had been thinking about her jazz musician husband, was crying happy tears. She could see that Sarah understood what her husband had always known. Music was not about showing off or competing with others. It was about making an honest connection between human hearts. The teenage girl was already texting her friends about what she had just experienced. She was trying to find words to describe music that had no words, trying to explain how classical piano had suddenly become the most exciting thing she had ever heard. Even the hotel staff was applauding. The waiters, the bartender, the event coordinator, and even some kitchen workers who had come out to see what was happening, all of them were clapping for the small woman in the black dress who had just transformed their ordinary work evening into something extraordinary. Linda Chun was already thinking about next year's gala. She knew that people would be asking if Sarah would perform again. She also knew that after tonight, Sarah would probably have many other opportunities to share her incredible talent with the world. As the ovation finally began to wind down, Sarah felt a mixture of joy, exhaustion, and amazement. In the space of one evening, she had rediscovered her musical voice, connected with an audience in a way she had never imagined possible, and received the kind of recognition that most musicians only dream about. But perhaps most importantly, she had remembered who she really was underneath all the years of playing it safe and making herself small. She was not just a school teacher who happened to play piano. She was a musician, a real musician, with a gift that was meant to be shared with the world. The standing ovation was finally ending, but Sarah knew that her new life as a performer was just beginning. The weeks following the charity gala passed like a whirlwind for Sarah. She woke up the morning after her performance feeling like she had lived through a beautiful dream. But the messages on her phone proved it had all been real. The young man who had recorded her performance had posted the video on social media during the night. By morning, it had been shared hundreds of times. By the end of the week, millions of people around the world had watched the video of the unknown school teacher who had left an entire ballroom speechless. The comments on the video were overwhelming. People from different countries wrote about how her music had moved them to tears. Professional musicians praised her technique and emotional expression. Music students said her performance had inspired them to practice harder and play with more feeling. But what surprised Sarah most were the messages from ordinary people who said her story had given them courage to pursue their own forgotten dreams. A nurse in Ohio wrote that she had started painting again after watching Sarah's performance. A businessman in Japan said he had signed up for guitar lessons after being inspired by Sarah's bravery. The phone calls started coming on Monday morning. The first was from a reporter at the local newspaper who wanted to write a story about Sarah's background and her incredible performance. Then a radio station called asking if she would be willing to be interviewed. By Wednesday, Sarah was getting calls from music schools, concert venues, and talent agencies. The dean of the state university's music program called to offer her a position teaching piano to advanced students. A recording company representative wanted to discuss making an album of her performances. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She had spent so many years being invisible that suddenly being in the spotlight was frightening and exciting at the same time. She took a few days off from teaching to think about what she wanted to do with all these unexpected opportunities. On Friday evening, she went back to the Riverside Hotel. Linda Chun had invited her for coffee to talk about what had happened and what it might mean for the future. They sat in the hotel restaurant, looking out at the same ballroom where Sarah's life had changed just 1 week earlier. "I still can't believe it really happened," Sarah said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I keep watching the video and thinking, it must be someone else playing," Linda smiled. "But it was you, Sarah. That incredible music came from your heart and your hands. The person who played that night was always inside you. You just needed the right moment to let her out." "The charity raised so much more money than we expected," Linda continued. "People were so moved by your performance that they doubled and tripled their donations. We're going to be able to fund music programs in 12 schools instead of the 6 we had planned." Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Knowing that her music had helped provide instruments and lessons for children who might not otherwise have access to them made all the attention and opportunities feel worthwhile. "What are you going to do about all the offers you've been getting?" Linda asked. Sarah had been thinking about this question all week. "I've decided to accept the university teaching position," she said. "I can still work with students, but older ones who are serious about music. And the schedule will give me time to perform and maybe make some recordings." "What about Lincoln Elementary? Will you miss teaching the younger children?" "I'll miss my students," Sarah admitted. "But I talked to the principal yesterday. The school board has agreed to hire 2 new music teachers with the publicity money they're getting from all the news coverage. The kids will actually have better music education than I could give them by myself." Linda nodded approvingly. "It sounds like everything is working out perfectly." "There's something else," Sarah said, her eyes brightening. "Harold Peterson, the elderly man who spoke to me during the gala, he called me yesterday. His late wife had a beautiful grand piano that has been sitting unused in their house. He wants to donate it to the university music program in her memory, and he asked if I would be the one to play it for special concerts." "That's wonderful," Linda said. "It sounds like your performance touched him deeply." "He told me something that I keep thinking about," Sarah continued. "He said his wife always believed that everyone has a song inside them, but most people are too afraid to sing it. He said watching me play that night was like watching someone finally find the courage to sing their true song." Over the following month, Sarah's new life began to take shape. She started teaching at the university in September, working with talented young pianists who reminded her of herself at that age. She encouraged them to take risks with their music and to play with emotion as well as technical skill. The recording company released an album of Sarah's performances, including a studio version of her improvised interpretation of the Beethoven Sonata from the Charity Gala. The album became popular with both classical music lovers and people who had never listened to piano music before. Sarah began giving concerts at venues around the region. She developed a reputation for performances that were both technically excellent and deeply moving. Music critics wrote that she had a rare ability to connect with audiences and make classical music feel accessible and relevant to modern listeners, but perhaps the most meaningful change was in Sarah herself. She no longer felt like she was hiding her true self from the world. The confident, passionate musician who had emerged that night at the Charity Gala became a permanent part of who she was. She kept in touch with Harold Peterson, visiting him occasionally to play his wife's piano and share stories about music. He became like a grandfather to her, offering wisdom and encouragement as she navigated her new career. A year after the Charity Gala, Sarah was invited back to perform at the annual event again. This time, she was the featured performer rather than a last-minute replacement. The ballroom was packed with people who had heard about her incredible performance the previous year. Sarah sat down at the same grand piano where her transformation had begun. She thought about how much her life had changed. She was no longer the frightened schoolteacher who had almost said no to Linda's phone call. She was a confident musician who knew that her gift was meant to be shared with the world, but the most important thing had not changed at all. Sarah still played music for the same reason she always had, not for fame or money or recognition, but for the pure joy of creating something beautiful and sharing it with others. As she began to play, Sarah smiled at the memory of that magical night when a simple tune had become something extraordinary. She had learned that the most amazing transformations often begin with a single moment of courage, a decision to stop hiding and start shining. The music flowed from her fingers with the same passion and honesty that had amazed everyone a year earlier. But now Sarah knew that this was not a one-time miracle. This was who she really was, who she had always been, waiting for the right moment to finally come home to herself. In the audience, Harold sat at the same table as before, listening with the same joy and appreciation he had shown that first night. He was thinking about his wife and how proud she would have been to see Sarah's journey from hidden talent to celebrated musician. As the beautiful music filled the ballroom once again, everyone present knew they were witnessing something special. But this time, Sarah knew it too. She was no longer surprised by her own gift. She was simply grateful for the chance to share it with a world that was ready to listen.